All right, let's just get going. All right, so welcome everybody to our event, Investing in Africa Post-COVID Tax Considerations, being hosted by the Chamber member LEX Africa and the South African Nigeria Business Chamber. LEX Africa, as you probably know, is a legal network covering most of sub-Saharan Africa. And so we're going to be looking today at, as the title suggests, what is happening in the wake of revenue challenges thrown up by the COVID pandemic. Governments are increasingly looking for new ways to raise revenues, and will tax be one of them? I mean, what can we expect to happen? How will governments react to the situation in which we find ourselves, particularly as we see a kind of retreat, I think, in parts of the world of the pandemic, and people are starting to look forward rather than the crisis management of the last few months and year. So are we facing a period of increased taxes, more onerous tax collection, harassment of existing taxpayers, which tends to be something that happens in a lot of African countries, particularly of multinational corporations and other low-hanging fruit? And our companies, what should they be doing? What should they be looking for? What kind of risk management do they have in place to address some of these issues? And are they increasingly searching for tax havens of one sort or another to reduce their tax costs? And how does this square with efforts by governments in Africa generally to mobilize domestic resources, which is very much a trend, is looking to see what we can do at home rather than seeking more debt and aid from other regions. So we're going to be looking at these and a lot of interesting issues in discussion with our distinguished panel of tax experts from around Africa. We do indeed have a very varied country spread, which is fantastic. I think we all face similar but also different challenges in Africa. So it's great to hear the different experiences of different people. So before we move on to the speakers, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm the CEO of the South Africa Nigeria Business Chamber, and I'm just going to share literally 2 slides with you, just for the purposes of branding, I suppose you would call it. So the South Africa Nigeria Business Chamber has been going for 16 years now. It's a long time, and particularly surprising for those of you who've never heard of us, I think. And we do a range of services looking at basically, sorry, I'm just trying to get the slide to move on. So just a few details. Literally, this is my only slide on this. Established in 2005, we're based in Johannesburg, but we do have an outward focus to Nigeria. So for anybody interested in the Nigerian market, of course, we have a Nigerian expert on our panel as well. You can look us up. Our website address is at the bottom of the slide there. We are the only official bilateral business organization between Africa's 2 biggest markets, and we are a voice for business in bilateral engagement. We have a ready-made network of companies doing business in Nigeria, both Nigerian and South African, and we are a unique reservoir of expertise, experience, etc. in the South Africa-Nigeria corridor. So that's it from us. Just have a look at our website if you're interested, or if you're interested in Nigeria, you may contact us. So thanks very much for that. So I'm going to move on to Peter Steyn, who is the chairman of LEX Africa, and also the director of Worksmans, which is a founding member of LEX Africa, a law firm based in Johannesburg. I'm sure many in our audience are familiar. So Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Diana. Welcome, everybody. We're delighted to host this, partner with the Chamber on this webinar. Just briefly, I mean, LEX Africa is Africa's first and largest legal alliance, formed in 1993, and we have over 600 lawyers in 26 African countries. So we have a long track record of assisting clients with regard to their African dealings, whether it's business, mergers and acquisitions, tax, disputes, and regulatory matters. We've got a website, which I'm sure will be shared with you later. We publish a business guide to Africa, guides on mining, enforcement of judgments in African countries, as well as insolvency and restructuring. We have been a member of the Chamber for many years, and I think the topic is really important. It's sometimes a topic that is not, you don't see, we're all bombarded with webinars in the last year and a half. I have yet to see a webinar on African tax. So I think it's an important and complex topic. And I trust that our expert panel will, under Diana's guidance, clarify many of the issues. And I think it's important that we make this interactive. So I think if you have questions that one tries to really get into the detail, because I always say get the devil's in the detail. I'm not a tax lawyer, but as a commercial lawyer, commercial corporate lawyer, my advice to clients is always prevention is better than cure. So with that introduction, I think I'll hand back over to you. Thank you, Diana.
All right, thanks very much, Peter. Yeah, you're right. I think that taxes is a really interesting issue. People always think of it as something that's just lurks in the background, but in fact, it's very much front and center of development in Africa, particularly now, which is the reason that we're holding this webinar. So I'm going to move on to our first speaker, Ebekunle Olatunji, who's works for one of Africa's biggest multinationals, and but is here today as an Africa and international tax expert. And he is also a board member of the South Africa-Nigeria Business Chamber and has spoken on this issue at various of our events over the years. So Ebekunle is going to really kick off with the broad look at tax in Africa. What is the outlook? What is the current situation? And what can we expect to happen? Well, how are tax authorities likely to react going forward to revenue challenges? And also, what can multinational companies expanding in Africa need to look out for? So Ebekunle, over to you.
Thank you, Diana, and good morning, everyone. Are we able to see my slides? Diana, could you kindly confirm?
Yes, we can see your slides.
Perfect. Good morning again, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for the opportunity. And over the next 10 minutes, I'll be speaking to the topic investing in Africa and the post-tax consideration. And for me, I've set it out in 3 segments where we're looking at the current situation in Africa. And Africa is going through a difficult time at this point, as we'll all appreciate. We're also going to look at where the revenue Africa needs will be coming from and how multinationals should position themselves. I've got a few slides here just to guide conversation, and it's no surprise at all. The entire world economy suffered in 2020, and Africa is not left out in that. Africa contracted by 1.9% in 2020, and this is by far the worst performance of Africa on record. For those who have been tracking Africa's growth, you'll appreciate Africa has been growing at about 5 to 9% on average over the past decade or so. And it's dealing with a slump for the first time in a long time. So it's difficult, but the world is picking up again, and there's projection from the IMF that Africa will grow by 3.4% in 2021. While this is laudable in some form because it's not positive, it's still slow compared to the rest of the world. It's actually presently the slowest growing region at this point. And this projection of 3.4% is also under risk, really, because of current headwinds that Africa is dealing with at this point. For those who are sports lovers, you see most of the world is returned back to the sporting arenas. Stadiums are getting filled up again. And this is on the back of the vaccination program. And I've got some stats I will show you around Africa's progress regarding vaccination. But what we're seeing is the economic recovery is largely, the rate of economic recovery is largely linked to the rate of vaccination. And the region's current financial struggles, especially in the fiscal policy aspect, it's putting this outlook of 3.4% under threat. Per capita GDP in many countries is not expected to return to the pre-crisis level until 2025. And this is, for me, a big concern because it's literally saying we've wiped out 5 years of Africa's progress. It sets us back a long way. And what I'm showing you here is the graph showing the widening gap between sub-Saharan Africa and the rest of the world from a per capita GDP perspective. And if you look at the levels for Africa at this point, it's taken us back to sort of the 2013 levels, which is really a big concern on a macro level. Again, as I mentioned, the vaccination rollout is critical for Africa's progress. And what I've shown you here is the vaccination rate by continent. And as you can see from here, in Europe, which is leading the pack, out of every 100 people, at least 96% has been vaccinated. And same thing goes for North America in the 90s. But if you look at Africa, we are under 7% vaccination in terms of coverage. And this is a real concern for the continent. I'm sure we would have had recent conversations with friends and colleagues and a range of people. There's a growing vaccination apathy on the continent. And it's important to appreciate that at the moment, the vaccination rollout plan is one of the quickest platforms to get us back to quick recovery. And another stats here show the dire situation we are facing on the continent, where 32 million additional people have been pushed into the extreme poverty line by COVID. And this is a concern because except something drastic is done, then the future outlook for Africa is, in the short term, is difficult. Africa is currently broke, unfortunately. There was severe government borrowing in 2020. Actually, according to the stats, Africa borrowed 66% of GDP in 2020. It's the highest level in a very long time. The continent needs a lot of financial investment to support the future growth. According to the IMF, Africa needs 425 billion, and that number itself is staggering because at this point, it's quite difficult to see where that's going to come from. Apart from borrowing more money, it's quite difficult because, as we all appreciate, government looks to tax revenue for the majority of its ability to fund social and economic infrastructure. At the moment, Africa is going to look to foreign international donors, public financial institutions, and the private sector. And I'm going to zone in on the private sector a little bit more because they are the larger contributors of government revenues. And the reality we face as a people is the crisis is not over anywhere until it is over everywhere, because we all need each other at this point. If one country is clean, I mean, we had the classic example with New Zealand. At some point, they were pretty much free from the pandemic, but now the story is different because as the world opens up, the crisis just pervades everywhere. This slide is interesting. It reflects tax collection as a percentage of GDP. And what I've tried to reflect here is the performance of Africa and seeing what Africa collects as percentage of GDP. According to the IMF, the sweet spot is 13%, that for a state to be able to fund its investment in public infrastructure, health, education, and the betterment of its people, you need to be collecting at least 13% of your GDP. As the tax should constitute at least 13% of your GDP. But if you look at the African narration, it's completely different. If you look at the lowest collectors, you see Nigeria, Equatorial Guinea, and Chad are in that region where they're collecting about 6% of GDP. But if you look at the top end, you see South Africa, Seychelles, Tunisia in that space. While this is still audible and over the 13% benchmark, it's still considerably low compared to the Africa average. The Africa average is 16.5%, and then if you look at the Latin America average, it's 23%. But compared to the European average, that's the OECD average, it's 34.3%. So this is not a great picture, but it also gives an opportunity because there's a huge gap for these African countries here to cover. Oops, sorry. There's a huge gap for the African countries to cover in terms of collecting revenue. So there's a huge growth potential for them. And that's, for me, where I would like to see this from that perspective. But if you then ask, from the perspective of the tax authorities, where do they see this additional revenue coming from? If it depends on who you ask. If you ask the tax authorities, the boxes that are shown up here are the places where they see the taxes coming from, in the form of new taxes. And we've seen this across a couple of African markets. So for example, in Ghana, the authorities that have introduced what they call a COVID relief levy, meaning everyone has to contribute their piece to helping government fund vaccinations and a few other public expenditure. We've seen that in the form of digital service taxes. That's rolling out in a couple of markets as well, trying to tax the digital economy. We're seeing sugar tax introduced in Botswana, and it's been mooted across a few Southern African countries. So that's something to look out for. We're also seeing it in the form of higher taxes. That's where we think some of the revenue may be coming from. And a number of authorities have increased revenue, especially in the excise tax space, in the personal income tax space. We're also seeing it in reduction of tax benefits or deductions, where, for instance, we're seeing they're introducing restrictions on the ability to claim tax treaty benefits or claim input VAT expenditure, that they're restricting what you can claim in there as well. And we're also seeing that in the form of aggressive tax audits, where in recent months, large multinationals are being named and shamed on the faces of newspapers, saying they need to account for huge tax bills, sometimes unjustifiable, but the harm has been done because they're in the public domain, unfortunately. But if you ask me, where's this revenue supposed to come from? I think Africa's got huge, immense potential. And we've been talking about this potential for decades, but it's high time Africa unlocked this potential. And I believe the opportunity is massive, because if you look at the stats, every single day, 90,000 new users connect to the internet. So as at yesterday, 90,000 new users were added. As at today, additional 90,000 will be added. This gives immense potential in the digitization space, in getting more people into the digital economy, creating more industries, creating jobs. That's a massive opportunity right there. Every single week, at least 6.5 billion worth of exports move across Africa. Unfortunately, of this 6.5 billion, only 20% are within the region, that is intra-regional trade, which is significant, but then it also means Africa is not retaining as much value as it can. And I believe the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, its quicker implementation would help Africa minimize its susceptibility to the global disruption. Again, every year we've got 20 million new job seekers, immense labor force right there. I mean, in the next 10 to 15 years, it's projected that 1 in 2 persons, new job seekers introduced into the global labor force will be from the region. There's a huge gap there where we need to scale up these people, give them access to the right tools and right opportunities, because these are the people that will be contributing to the tax revenue in the future. And I believe African government needs to focus on this to unlock the value we're looking for. And what we're seeing from the tax authorities on the other hand, though, is increasing intolerance to tax minimization schemes and aggressive tax planning, where if you're coming up with ideas, I mean, at recent tax proposal conversations with some government agencies, they tell you blunt outright to say, this idea you're bringing, is it going to reduce revenue or bring more revenue? They're not looking at the convenience for the taxpayer. They're not looking at the business-friendly environment we're going to create to enable them unlock more value. But it's a lot of short-term thinking, unfortunately. And again, they're reacting to the pressure of the recent times. The tax base is shrinking. Lots of organizations have been negatively impacted by COVID. Businesses have been closed down. The tax base is shrinking. The public expenditure profile is increasing. So that's a difficult balance for the tax authorities to manage. But again, we believe the role of government is not to create jobs. It's to create an enabling environment for the private sector to drive and remove bottlenecks. And the more of these that can be removed, the quicker we can return to winning ways. So there's a huge, huge need for strong reforms aimed at building capacity, and we need to modernize our tax systems. How should our multinationals position themselves? They should pay their fair share of tax, but increasingly that's no longer enough, unfortunately, because we're seeing the growing clamor by government, by the public, by consumers, that they also need to give something back to society. They need to do business in a sustainable way. They need to contribute to the COVID relief campaign. You're seeing businesses now raise their hands up to say, we'll volunteer, we'll buy vaccines for employees and their families, we'll use their facilities as vaccination centers. So there's that clamor that businesses have to do much more than just paying taxes. They need to be green. They need to do business in a sustainable way. They need to source products from regions where things have been grown in human ways and things like that. Again, the other one I would highlight here is avoid value mismatches. This goes to speak to the recent campaign by the OECD around base erosion and profit shifting, where multinationals need to ensure that where you are performing your business activities is very close to where you're earning the profit. So Viva, no more tax havens. Basically, that's what that is saying. Earn profit in the place where you're doing the business. Again, with the outset of COVID now, people can work anywhere. It's important for multinationals to track where their senior African leadership is working from to avoid the creation of permanent establishment risks. Mobility at this point, the tax laws have not unfortunately caught up to the new ways of work. So there's a risk there multinationals need to look out for. Audits will increase. So prepare to avoid them, put yours in order, ensure you can substantiate all your transactions, have your documentation in place, so that when you go through an audit, you come out clean on the other end of it. The last point here I'll speak to is report your tax contributions from an ESG perspective. And ESG is sort of the latest buzzword in the tax space, where we're saying tax has an impact on the environment, tax has an impact on the social infrastructure of society as well. And then also tax has an impact within the bottom. There needs to be governance around tax. This started about 16 years ago when some researchers came together and were saying there's a tax thread that runs through the environment, social, and governance, and the value drivers of all of this have a connection with tax. So this is sort of the new slant and buzzword in the tax space, where every multinational going forward, this is big in Europe, and already Africa is starting to catch on. And every multinational needs to start to think about the impact on the environment, and we will see more environmental taxes coming up as a result of that. Their social contribution to building the human capacity within the organizations, contributing to the workforce, contributing to social impact programs, that's going to be important. And a governance framework that enables that interaction also needs to be in place for them. And it's important that Africa catches up to this, because that's the latest trend. So I think I'll pause for here to allow other presenters to talk. I think that's the end of my presentation, Dana. And thank you again for the opportunity.
Great, thank you very much, Kunle. That's a fantastic broad view of what we can expect and what the current situation is, actually. I just wanted to ask you one question. I mean, are there tax authorities in Africa? You know, in a way, there is a kind of a ESG stroke sort of poverty tax, if you like, that is kind of rolling out under the sort of banner of shared value and various other things. Are tax authorities, are they enabling investment, or are they deterrent to investment? And does business really have any power over this? Is there collaboration between big multinationals, tax authorities, to get a better, to get a more fair deal, or is there anything like this happening in the background?
Yes, I think so. There are, and I think it's a mixed bag, really, because there are pockets of excellence in particular regions, and there are two extremes. In regions where it's working quite well, where there's collaboration between government and the private sector, as you ideally would want that to happen, where there's engagement before new laws are introduced. And there's the other extreme where it's quite dictatorial in a way. They just tell you, this is the new law, and you should just get on with the program. So I think there's a need to have shared learning, and I believe under the Africa Tax Administrations Forum gives a very good platform for tax authorities to share learning. But overall, I'd say it's on an even keel whether they're enabling the business environment, because again, they are acting under pressure to collect revenue. But I believe if they can share learnings among each other, they can be a bit more humane in the way they come up with their tax programs.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, it's the blunt instrument approach that I think mostly we are seeing. Okay, thanks very much, Kunle. I'm going to move on to our next speaker now, and that is Nazima Malik, who's a partner at Stratton & Kaplan in Kenya, a leading law firm based in Nairobi. Nazima is going to just drill down into some of the developments in Kenya on the impact of COVID on the economy and what the government is likely to do as the pandemic begins to ease, and also kind of currently where we are in the tax situation in Kenya. Nazima, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Dana, and good morning, everyone. So I'll just begin by setting out just broadly what happened in Kenya last year from the tax perspective when COVID was first detected in Kenya and the government began to implement measures just to ease business in the country, for ease of doing business in the country. And the first thing that happened, and which was completely unprecedented, is the tax laws were amended in April of 2020. We usually have our tax acts amended every year in June after the budget speech is read. But these were unprecedented times. Our first cases of COVID began to emerge in March, and the government moved very, very quickly to implement a lockdown of sorts. We were all advised to work from home. Government offices were closed. We had a night curfew. A lot of bars, restaurants, hotels were shut down, which obviously then had an impact on the economy. So in the amendments that were imposed in April, what the government tried to do to cushion some of the to cushion the economy and to cushion the companies that were suffering from the measures, the lockdown measures, was that they first reduced the corporation tax rate from 30% to 25%. VAT was reduced from 16 to 14%. The minimum turnover was reduced from 3% to 1%. They also imposed measures so that the pay-as-you-earn tax for your employees, especially the lower cadre of employees, was substantially reduced. For turnover tax, they reduced the threshold so as to cushion the small and medium-sized companies from 1 million to 500,000. So those were broadly the kinds of measures that were put in place to try and cushion the corporate industry. Now, unfortunately, what the government does, and I think it's governments everywhere, they give with one hand and quickly try and take away with the other. So we also, in those very measures, saw the investment deduction being reduced from 150% to 100%. We saw measures to increase withholding tax on dividends to non-residents, increased from 10% to 15%. We saw imposition of withholding tax on companies that provide services, marketing and support services, sales support services to companies outside Kenya, non-resident companies. We also saw a number of exemptions being removed from especially parastatals, and this was interesting because they particularly targeted the parastatals in the agricultural industry, and I think that the reason was they found that even though the corporate sector had been affected, our agricultural sector seemed somewhat resilient even during the COVID era. So all that was implemented on the 25th of April, with the hope that come 2021, the pandemic would be behind us, and the government would then take other measures and hopefully give incentives to the corporate sector to help recovery. Unfortunately, come January 2021, the pandemic was still very much with us. In fact, we were in a worse off position in Kenya in terms of numbers. And the measures that were taken had created a huge gap, a huge hole in government revenue. And interestingly, and just before I go to what happened then in January, through the region, Tanzania, of course, did not believe COVID at the time, did not believe COVID existed. So they didn't take similar measures. The other countries, Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda, imposed some measures, but I think the wider raft of measures were imposed by the Kenyan government. So come January 2021, the Kenyan government reversed the corporation tax back from 25 to 30%. VAT went back up to 16%. And some of the other measures were also reversed. The investment deduction and the increase of the withholding tax, for example, that continued to remain in force. So of course, there was a bit of an outcry from the corporate sector, especially since companies, the corporate sector were continuing to suffer from the onslaught of the pandemic, which remained in force. The night curfews remained in force. Our entertainment sector would open sporadically and then be shut off. So in terms of the economy, that really hadn't turned around. So when our budget was read in June this year, unfortunately, no incentives whatsoever were provided as expected in the budget speech for the corporate sector. But equally, we did not see any new harsh taxation that was imposed as a result of COVID. So the kind of COVID funds that Kunle was referring to, we didn't see any of that happen in Kenya. But interestingly, and I think for the first time in a very long time, the Treasury met its revenue collection budget at a time like this. And the reason for that was very simple. Because of the onset of COVID, we have seen a very aggressive move towards revenue collection. The tax revenue authority, our Kenya Revenue Authority, is taking no prisoners. Our tribunals, the Tax Appeals Tribunal, which is appointed sadly by the Treasury, so doesn't seem to be very independent, was under pressure to clear a backlog of almost 800 cases in 2 months. And that really generated a lot of income for the government and helped bridge that gap. Equally, our courts are under pressure to fast track and speed up all the tax appeals that are pending in the courts. And we're seeing, and I think Kunle alluded to this, and that's very true in Kenya, a very, very aggressive move towards revenue collection with the onset of COVID. It's almost getting to the point of being desperate. Then in terms of what should companies who are now seeking to invest in Kenya during these times, what should you be wary of? Like I said, there is a lot of aggression towards tax collection. From a VAT perspective, a lot of the audits are what they call desk audits, desk-generated audits, so very quickly done, sometimes very unfairly done, and the more the reason why any company investing in Kenya at this time really needs to be on top of the way they maintain their documentation. The one interesting amendment we did see in the laws this year, and again impacting that would impact companies seeking to set up subsidiaries in Kenya for provision of exported services, for example, marketing services, is that they've now exempted VAT on exported services. That was previously zero rated, but is now exempted. And the impact of that, the direct impact, is that you can no longer, as a subsidiary of a multinational in Kenya, seek refunds on the services that you then provide to your head offices outside Kenya. And that has had an impact on a number of multinationals who have their subsidiaries in Kenya. Of course, the imposition of withholding tax on these services was not reversed. We also have, and this was done prior to the onset of COVID, And that was something that the companies investing in Kenya need to be wary of. And we have what is called a minimum tax. So you're required to pay 1% of your turnover, whether or not you make a profit. Now, luckily, the Bar Owners Association in a little town outside Nairobi, and thank God for the bar owners and saving the rest of us in such times, went to court and got an injunction to stop this tax being implemented because it was hurting a lot of companies. The matter is still in court, and we hope the judge did give an interim injunction, and we hope that that will continue to remain in place after he determines the case fully. The other issue that we're seeing arising is around transfer pricing. The Revenue Authority almost always, when doing their transfer pricing audits, completely disregards the methods that are used by various organizations and seeks to impose their own on what we usually think are very flimsy and unsupported grounds. Now, sadly, transfer pricing being technical, it's very difficult sometimes for the tribunal to grasp these concepts. And we've seen that in instances where we've even argued these cases before the tribunal will agree with you that the Revenue Authority did not employ the correct method or the correct benchmarking, but will give the Revenue Authority a chance to go and redo the whole thing instead of just throwing the assessment out. And therefore, you wonder whether there is this impression, both with the Revenue Authority and the persons who hear your appeals, that transfer pricing is simply a way of multinationals moving their profits out of Kenya. And I think we're yet to get at least even a High Court decision that completely demystifies transfer pricing and makes it clear that that's why you have these rules, and it's really not a tax avoidance mechanism. So that generally is what the scenario in Kenya looks like. During this period, we continue, like I said, to see the aggressive revenue collection. Of course, the Kenya Revenue Authority, having surpassed their target, are even more encouraged by the manner in which they're seeking to collect these taxes. And we see that there are going to be more audits and done in a more aggressive manner than we're already experiencing.
Thank you very much, Nazima. That's I don't think that's good news for anybody, really. maybe the Kenyan government. I just wonder, does this not speak to, it seems to be across Africa an inherent mistrust between government and the private sector, and I think the one thing companies will always tell you they need is predictability. They're prepared to pay whatever is required as long as it's predictable and they can plan for it. I mean, do you feel that that's not happening? Everyone understands with COVID, there's a lot of palliative measures have been introduced, and as you said, give with one hand, take with the other. Do you think that there's, there is this kind of mistrust, and how you counter that's playing into this whole tax story in Africa and in Kenya in your case?
Yeah, and definitely there is that mistrust, because you're just waiting every year with bated breath as to what measures are going to be taken. The one thing that we have experienced, especially this year, is that there was a lot of lobbying from the private sector and the multinationals against this imposition, for example, of the VAT, the exemption of the VAT refunds, which makes it an extra cost. And unfortunately, despite all the very good arguments that were put across, that was never implemented. Now, what has been happening, of course, as I said, the bar owners went to court. On other matters, we've been trying to get some sort of certainty on the implementation and of some of these provisions on the interpretation of the tax laws from the tribunals, from the courts. But we've also had instances where the tribunal itself gives conflicting decisions, or a court may give a conflicting decision. So it doesn't really help the cause, so to speak. And of course, whereas it is positive that they're trying to speed up the resolution of tax cases, so that hopefully with the speeding up of the cases and if the courts do issue decisions that are uniform, that hopefully will bring about some level of certainty in the interpretation of these laws.
Great. Well, thank you very much for an extremely interesting presentation there. I'm just going to read something off the Q&A. From Tamsin. One of the biggest issues about tax in African countries is a lack of clarity about what is involved. This makes investors nervous. And I think that is certainly a great comment and something that I think everybody can agree with. And that is not good for Africa. As I said, it's the blunt instrument approach, which is probably going to reduce growth, job creation, and all the things actually Africa needs. Just want to mention at this point, the Q&A, please just start thinking about questions that you'd like to ask, just stick them up here. We'll deal with them maybe at the end of at the speakers, or maybe as we go along. So please think about what you'd like to. You've got all these experts here, sitting here waiting, and please think about what you'd like to know as we move on. So I'm going to now move on to our next speaker. So Ivy Osiobi is an executive associate at law firm in Nigeria, Giwa Sagi and Company. Nigeria has, I think many would argue, a particularly challenging tax environment where you are seeing the sort of onerous hounding, if you like, of companies, both multinationals. In South Africa, we've heard about, MTN extensively and the tax authorities, and now Multichoice, but in fact, and it's not as many have interpreted about South African companies, it's about all companies in Nigeria. People battle with the different layers of taxes and with the attitude of the tax authorities. So Ivy, I'd like to hand over you to tell us a little bit about what's going on there.
Okay, thank you. Good morning to everybody. So I'll be sharing my slides in a moment. Can you see my slide, please? Can you see my slide?
Yes, Ivy, yes, we can see them perfectly. Carry on.
So there's a lot of areas to cover and very limited time, so I'm moving very fast. Now, first of all, we have two facts here. Africa is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and for foreign direct investment inflows, Africa has one of the highest compared to other developing regions. And Nigeria is right in the middle of these happenings. We have Nigeria as the largest economy in Africa with a GDP of over $400 billion. And also the second highest recipient of FDI in Africa. Now, if you look closely at the slide, I highlighted some industries that contribute to the Nigerian GDP. And you'll see that the oil sector contributes 9% compared to other sectors. Now, I want that to sink in because as I go forward, I would refer to this. Now, why is taxation relevant here? On one hand, we have investors that want to maximize profit and minimize their tax liability. And on the other hand, we have the government that wants to boost revenue and maximize taxes. So there's a bit of a conflict of interest there. And that brings us to our next slide on the Nigeria tax environment. Now, Nigeria operates a three-tier structure for taxation. We have the Federal Inland Revenue Service, we have the state boards, and then the local government. And the administration of tax in Nigeria comes with various challenges. And I've highlighted three key challenges here. We have low tax compliance. Now, a recent report from the International Monetary Fund shows that Nigeria has a labor force of over 77 million persons, and just about 10 million persons are registered for tax. So the compliance level is very low. And there's also poor collection as well, which is due to both the citizens' attitude towards tax and then also the government not having enough infrastructure to actually collect this tax. And then there's the issue of multiple taxation. Now, Nigeria has a federal system, federal, state, local government, and the tax system follows this structure. So some level of multiplicity is to be expected, but it also creates loopholes whereby taxpayers are taxed on the same income, the same liability, on the same income, actually. And that has led to tax evasion, tax avoidance, and all of this. And what these challenges have created is a low tax base, which translates to what we have as a 6% tax to GDP ratio. Now, if you look closely at the pie charts on the slides, you will see I've highlighted here, the oil sector contributes 9% to the GDP. Surprisingly, it also contributes 61% to the tax revenue. And then we have other sectors that's, that contributes about 91% to the GDP with just 39% tax revenue. So these are some of the things that leads to low tax to GDP ratio for Nigeria. Now, what is the government doing to increase the TTG? I'll come back to this in a moment, but first of all, let me look at post-COVID. Now, there are certain relevant impacts of COVID-19 in the Nigerian economy. We had business decline, revenue shortfalls, Nigeria entered into economic recession, and although we've emerged from recession, we're still grappling with the after effects. And then there's the issue of forex shortage, and the reason for this is not far-fetched. Nigeria derives most of its forex earnings from oil, and the drop in oil price definitely led to a shortage in forex. And the government have had to put certain measures in place to boost the economy, to support businesses that were affected by the COVID-19. And there's been a combination of both fiscal and monetary measures. And what we'll see there is that the government has had to pump a lot of funds into different sectors to encourage businesses. And when we just oppose the short-term measures taken by the government with the impact of COVID-19 on government revenue, a burning question arises: are these short-term measures sustainable? The answer is a fat no, because in the long term, the government would, these short-term measures would lead to government increasing its debts, further reducing revenue. And that leads to what I like to call the scale. On this scale, we have on one hand, government wants to generate revenue. They want to get revenue from tax. And on the other hand, we have investors, business activities that need to grow, investors that want to minimize their tax liability. The question is, can the government strike a balance here? They can, and they should, because what we know is that no country can tax itself into wealth, right? And the government will need to go plan towards long-term sustainable sustainable source to increase tax revenue. And that will only come from increasing business activities, increasing employment, and all of that. So striking a balance is not just what government should do, it's something that is mandatory to do. Going forward to the tax environment post-COVID, what we're seeing from the body language of the Federal Inland Revenue is that they're adopting an aggressive approach to enforcing tax compliance in Nigeria. And a recent case comes to mind, Multichoice and FIRS. Now, this particular case raises certain issues. FIRS on one side, they are saying that the parent company for Multichoice has never paid tax in Nigeria. And Multichoice is saying, well, we have a subsidiary that pays tax, so our parent company does not have to pay tax. Now, that raises certain issues as to what is the position of the law on this. Now, it is true that parent entities, offshore companies, do not need to pay tax in Nigeria, but that will depend on a lot of other factors. Are they providing services directly to Nigerian entities? Are they deriving income directly from Nigeria? Where these conditions exist, then they will have to pay tax. In fact, a recent decision comes to mind in the case of Vodacom and the Federal Inland Revenue Services. Now, what happened in that case is that an offshore company provided services to a Nigerian company, directly to a Nigerian company. And the nature of the service is such that they do not even need to enter into Nigeria to provide that service. However, the court held that the service is liable to VAT because they are deriving income from that service, and the service is being consumed here in Nigeria. And this also aligns with the OECD principle on destination principle for taxation. Now, another issue that comes to mind is the issue raised by FRS, stating that they've made requests for audits, they've asked for documents, they've asked for information, and Multichoice has refused or probably neglected to comply. And that also raises another issue, because if you look at the laws, Nigerian laws, it allows the FIRS to ask for this information, and then it imposes a corresponding duty for the company to comply. So that raises an issue of regulatory compliance. Now, there have been insinuations that the FIRS is targeting multinationals and all of that. Is that true? Probably, but I do not think it's an issue of witch hunting. It's not like they're there's the intention to let's intimidate them, let's drag their name through the mud and all of that. No, I think it's more of an issue of a low tax base. And that's what a low tax base does. It makes the few taxpayers very visible, very visible. So when the FRS is going after these few taxpayers, it looks like, oh, someone is being targeted. It's just that the tax base is low. I think that's the challenge there. And FRS approach to enforcing tax compliance has been felt by both locals and multinationals. We saw in 2019 that they published, the FRS published a list of tax defaulters, which included both locals and multinationals. And also there's this perception from the FRS that a lot of multinationals are engaging in profit shifting, creating artificial transactions and loss distribution to taxable entity to avoid tax. In fact, the executive chairman of the FRS came out to say that they've observed these happenings. So therefore, they are going to be, focused on these entities to be sure that there's some level of tax compliance there. So, so next on my slide, which is the last on my slide, is what measures has the Nigerian government taken to improve tax to GDP ratio. Now, a basic measure to improve tax to GDP ratio is to make sure that everyone is paying their tax. And what we've seen, from what I said earlier, the oil sector is contributing so much to the tax revenue, and other sectors are combined are contributing just about 30% or so. Now, it can't work that way. And what the government has done so far is to enact laws, the Finance Act 2020, the Companies and Allied Matters Act 2020, meant to drive compliance from all other sectors to improve the ease of doing business. And what is some of the key provisions in the Finance Act? We have incentives for punctual filing of returns. We have small companies are not required to pay tax. Small companies earning a revenue of about 25 million naira annually do not have to pay tax. So what it does is that it reduces cost of administration and allows the government to focus on middle-sized and large companies. And then there's also the introduction of the significant economic presence rule to widen the tax base. So what this rule does is that it's saying if you are providing digital services in Nigeria, you'll be required to pay tax provided you have significant economic presence. So it brings those people providing services, digital services, into the tax net. And then there's also the issue of services is now VATable, unlike what we had before. We had just goods being VATable. Now services are VATable. So that's further widening the tax base. And the government has also introduced e-platforms for easier administration and monitoring, and also set up a joint tax board to manage multiple taxation, and also carrying out public sensitization, because the attitude towards tax is poor. And there's needs for reorientation to get the citizens to understand why this the tax is necessary for economic development. Have these measures been effective? It's so early to tell yet, but we hope that they will be, and Nigeria will eventually be able to boost its tax to GDP ratio. Yes. So that's all for my presentation.
Great, thanks very much, Ivy. There's so much information in there, and I have quite a lot of questions, but I'm not going to raise all of them now. Just, this thing with MultiChoice and with multinationals, given the importance of foreign investment to Nigeria, it just seems to me that FIRS always seems to be behind the curve in trying to figure out what are the obligations of companies and in this kind of thing, and the parent companies and all of these different issues. And they seem to be very quick to name these companies, which has huge reputational effect. I mean, I don't know if you say there's no witch hunt for foreign investors, but I just wondered if there are any particular issues on that. That is the perception from outside, that FIRS should be doing its job. It shouldn't be doing a lot of retrospective kind of tax analysis and finding people guilty of things that go back years. Am I wrong?
No, that's true. That's true. What this multi-choice issue shows is that the government has not been doing their job, because they're saying that they are liable to tax of about 1.8 trillion that goes back years. So why does it have to get to this point, right? This should be monitoring these things, and that's the issue. That's one of the issues I talked about. Poor collection. the infrastructure, the resources, they are struggling with those things. But I think the government is going to focus on tax, and they are focusing on getting these infrastructures in place so that they can monitor these things, and rather than have what we have now with Multichoice.
Great. Well, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation there. Hopefully we'll have more questions on the Nigeria side. So on the last of our speakers, Dev Area, who's the head of area chambers in Mauritius, there's a lot of interest in and talk about what Mauritius offers in terms of as a preferred tax center and what the benefits are and so on. And I think there's certainly a lot of South African companies that are either headquartered there or looking at it. And so I just wanted Dev to talk a little bit about what is the status of that? How has this been impacted by COVID, if at all? And is demand growing? And if so, where is that demand coming from? Is it coming from Africa, to African companies? Is it coming from Asia or elsewhere? So Dev, over to you.
Thank you, Diana. Good morning to everybody.
What is the issue?
Good morning.
Let's put to full screen presentation mode.
Ivy, can you just turn your microphone? Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, let me give you a brief introduction of the Mauritius tax system first. As you would all know, that Mauritius is an offshore tax jurisdiction, which means that it is an international financial center created since 1993. So the aim was to diversify our economy, with a view that to attract foreign investors to set up in Mauritius so that they can go and use Mauritius as a gateway to various jurisdictions, namely the African continent, the Asian continent, Europe, and some of the American countries. The tax system here, how it applies, we have three regimes for tax purposes. We have the domestic company, which are taxable at 15%. And then we have the concept of offshore companies, which was initially created when the law was introduced, that is now called global business company, which is taxable at 3%. And then we have authorized company, which has replaced the global business category 2 company, previously known as international business companies. And the authorized companies are not taxable. So we have three companies: domestic companies taxable at 15%, offshore global business company taxable at 3%, and then authorized company, zero tax. Mauritius has got a wide network of double tax treaties with various countries. We have about 40 tax treaties, and we have various tax treaties with African countries, whereby the aim of those double tax treaties, which I will call DTAs, they are to actually provide facilities for commercial and business structure where Mauritius is being used in between two other countries. For instance, if we have South Africa and we have Mauritius and we have Kenya, so we have double tax treaty with these two countries. So if you're using Mauritius, Mauritius will be used as a gateway or a conduit to bring the business either into Kenya or in South Africa or in Mozambique or in Zambia or in Senegal, where we have double tax treaty. So that will encourage investors to get tax saving, whereby the initial taxation will be 3%. So that is very encouraging for foreign investors who are using Mauritius to invest in countries like Africa, India, Asia, and also in Europe. It has been proved to be very, very attractive, and Mauritius has been established as that international financial center so far. With COVID, not much has been affected in terms of our international offshore centers because the tax system remains the same. We have had some introduction of new tax regime in relation to domestic companies, whereby domestic companies has got some relief in relation to facilities provided during COVID, whereby deduction of certain expenses, namely in terms of medical expenses, has been allowed exemption. And we have some tax exemption for SMEs in relation to their deductibility of expenses. In fact, nothing has changed really in terms of tax as such in Mauritius pursuant to the COVID. And we have certain administrative fiscal exemption which has been given, like deferment of tax, deferment of tax return, reduction on or VAT on certain medical expenses, but nothing really in terms of our international financial services business. So that is in relation to COVID. However, notwithstanding COVID, Mauritius is one of the preferred jurisdictions for investment, I would say internationally, but the focus has been recently business into Africa, whereby Mauritius has been seen as the main gateway for business into Africa. The main benefit would certainly be Mauritius has got a low tax regime for international business. Mauritius is a very good geographical location to do business with Africa, mainly because the time difference is not that much. In some countries, it is 1 hour. With other countries, it is 2 hours. So that is not a big problem. We have a very good educational system, whereby Mauritius use English and French as a main language. So we can assist investment or business with African Francophone countries and African Anglophone countries. Mauritius has got a very good political and economic stability, whereby we are stable politically. We have never had any problem like many other countries. And we have a very good legal system, which is hybrid, whereby the French civil law and the English common law form part of our legal system. That is very helpful with very good court structure, whereby the Privy Council is our final court of appeal. So if we have a decision from our Supreme Court and whereby the international investor is not happy with that decision, they can appeal to the Privy Council for judgment. We have very interesting cases which has gone to the Privy Council by foreign investors, and we have very good judgment which actually pay heed to all international aspects of business. We have a very good arbitration law as well, and we have adopted the New York Convention on Recognition and Enforcement of International Arbitral Award, which worked very, very well. We have had recent judgment from the Privy Council on the issue of recognition and enforcement of foreign arbitral award, which has been very encouraging. Those are the benefits in relation to Mauritius. One aspect which has actually seen some development is our network of double tax treaties, mainly with African countries, Senegal, Lesotho, Zambia, Kenya, whereby they have actually unofficially came out with an argument that Mauritius is being used for tax evasion. This can be a debate, but I don't want to dwell too long on the debate aspect of it. Suffice is to say that this is not the case, because when you enter or negotiate a double tax treaty, in fact, the essence of a double tax treaty is to avoid double tax in relation to an individual or in relation to that economic aspect of the double tax treaty, mainly the income. So the idea is for the person not to be taxed twice or the income to be taxed twice. So our double tax treaty is based on the OECD model, but with the African countries, our model used is a United Nations model, which is mainly adopted by most of the African countries. So it would not be true to say that the double tax treaty is being used for tax evasion, because when you are negotiating a double tax treaty, the main aim to facilitate business. So it is understood, and this is the main rationale of a double tax treaty, that one country will lose on its tax base, so there'll be a sort of erosion on the tax base, and the other country will not get much in the case of Mauritius, but business will flow more to the other country which is losing on tax. So it is a win-win situation whereby one country loses a little bit on its tax system, the other country will get more investment into that country. So if you look in a pragmatic way how the double tax treaty is working, you will see business is flowing into Africa via Mauritius, mainly via Mauritius, and it is obvious that it is going to various parts of the African countries because Mauritius has got that stability which allow an investor to come and invest in Mauritius and then into Africa rather than to go directly in Africa. That is one of the consideration which investors take before going to invest in those African countries. So Mauritius has worked very well in that respect. True it is that one of the country will be on the losing side in relation to the revenue which is being earned by the country which is investing in Africa, because under our treaty based on the OECD model, that revenue, if it has been taxed in Africa, there will be no tax in Mauritius as regard the income. Okay. However, if it is a capital gain which is being realized on the sale of shares in an African company with which Mauritius has got a double tax treaty, and there's a double tax treaty, that capital gain tax cannot be taxed in the African countries if the taxpayer is resident in Mauritius. That is the OECD model. It is reflected in the Article 12 of the OECD model, which has been adopted in our double tax treaty in Mauritius, and that has been negotiated with those African countries which has been claimed that the Mauritius double tax treaty encouraged tax evasion and tax dodging. So I think I will stop here in relation to the double tax treaty. What the issue we have, for instance, actually is we are on the gray list of the Financial Action Task Force in relation to anti-money laundering and counterterrorism and finance of counterterrorism. That means that our local regulatory structure does not fully comply with the 40 recommendation of the Financial Action Task Force, and we have been there since 2018. However, Mauritius has made much progress, and the Financial Action Task Force has recently stated that we have done wide progress, and they have an on-site visit scheduled for October. Following the on-site visit, then they will decide whether Mauritius should be out of the gray list. The consequence of the gray list is that we are on the blacklist of the European Union in relation to anti-money laundering issues only. We are not on the blacklist of the Financial Action Task Force in relation to tax. In relation to tax, we are on the white list. We don't have that problem. It is only in relation to AML, that is anti-money laundering. Now, as regard tax itself, we are not on the blacklist of the OECD neither, because we fully comply with all requirements of BEPS. The OECD has recently issued a communique to say that Mauritius is not on the blacklist. So to go back to that issue of tax evasion, one cannot say Mauritius is used as a tax haven for tax evasion mainly, because the use of Mauritius is actually to encourage MNEs, multinational, to use Mauritius to be able to go to developing countries, which requires FDI, foreign direct investment, because you have to accept that if a foreign investor will not want to invest in any country if that foreign investor is not getting a certain advantage in relation to tax. If we put it very bluntly, I will not go invest in any countries whereby I will pay tax 33%, 40%, 50%. In the end, I would certainly choose a jurisdiction which will actually provide me with tax saving. And also we have to be clear about that. Structuring of one's business is lawful, even if that actually give rise to tax avoidance, which is lawful. Okay, so this is how Mauritius operates as a preferred tax jurisdiction. And actually, I may say Mauritius is one of the most attractive jurisdictions when it comes to investment in Africa or even in India. Okay, we don't have in our system provision which allow tax evasion. On the contrary, with the advent of BEPS and with a view to comply with all the requirements of BEPS, Mauritius has brought various amendments to the income tax, like we have introduced a CFC legislation, which is a controlled finance foreign company legislation, and that is an anti-tax haven provision whereby we don't allow foreign MNEs or multinational companies to use Mauritius if it is only for tax purposes. All right, so we have a sort of substance regulation and laws in Mauritius which allow you to use Mauritius if your transaction has got substance. And if you have a substance, then you can avail yourself of the tax facilities in Mauritius. I may say, in conclusion, that Mauritius has been used widely for African business, and Mauritius has contributed widely to those foreign direct investment. I mean, we work a lot with African countries through LEX Africa as well, whereby Mauritius is being solicited mainly for investment, like in South Africa, in Mozambique, in Angola, in Kenya, Zambia. They are international business and genuine business with wide substance. And we can't say Mauritius is being used mainly as a tax haven. In fact, Mauritius is not a tax haven as defined by international organization. We are a clean jurisdiction in that respect, save for that issue of AML, whereby we are on the grey list for Financial Action Task Force. We hope to be out of there very soon. That's from me.
Yes, I'm sure you are. That's not necessarily a very good place to be, but well, good luck with that. Dev, I just as the African Union approached Mauritius on this issue of tax evasion, I mean, this with all these you know, the fight back against money leaving, you know, tax evasion in Africa, etc., by big companies. Have you had any engagement with the African Union at all on this?
Yes, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs has explained our position on that issue, and it has been made clear that Mauritius is not being used for tax evasion, because there cannot be tax evasion under a double tax treaty if that double tax treaty has been negotiated between two states, because the treaty is clear. Okay, so there are provisions there. The treaty says, if I take the example of the Mauritian and Mozambique tax treaty. If you go to Article 12 in relation to capital gain tax, it says gain realized by a Mauritian resident in the other country, Mozambique, that gain cannot be taxed in Mozambique, but will be taxed in Mauritius. This is a treaty which says that. So when that treaty was negotiated, both states, they were aware of that provision. Okay, sure. And a treaty is an agreement between two states. You can't now come and complain that, oh, sorry, people are making abuse of that treaty. The abuse, you can have provision to prevent that from within your country and the other country. There are provisions which you can put in your tax system to prevent tax treaty abuse. Okay, this is why Mauritius has not, if I may end up on that, this is why Mauritius has not hesitated to sign the multilateral agreement with the OECD, whereby if there's any tax evasion or tax avoidance issue, that will be corrected under the MLI. It's not true to say that Mauritius is being used to actually cause tax evasion in African jurisdictions. That's not true at all. we can have a debate on that at a later stage, which will be interesting.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Dev. I think a very comprehensive view of what Mauritius offers and what how you're tackling the issues, perceptions, or whatever they are. I'm just looking at the questions. As for this is from Takuma. I don't know if this is maybe a bit localized for the audience. Possibly, Takuma, you can pick it up with Ivy. As for the Nigerian tax reform, how will FG manage the huge petroleum subsidy? Ivy, can I ask you to pick that up with Takuma? We can offline. I just think that that's a very specific Nigerian question, and I think we're running out of time here. I'm just going to raise one other question, last question here. I'd point you to what Maxwell has written, which I think is a very good point on the chat line. Dev, could you turn your microphone off? Legitimate businesses want to comply and understand their tax obligations. What is an investment disincentive is in fact unwarranted, ill-advised and fluid tax compulsion. And of course, one of the elephants in the room is perceived corruption. Tax regime should be made to be much clearer, less fluid, and not be changed on the go, especially when it seems that if authorities realize an investor is growing their business and making more profits, then new tax legislation is put in place to milk those earnings. So anyway, I won't read it all. You've got it up on your chat line, but I think there's some very good points in there. And I mean, if Mauritius is succeeding, I mean, perhaps other governments need to look at what how they could make it easier. So sorry, Dev, to just say this, but I mean, maybe that people don't have to go or feel that they need to go through Mauritius to get a better deal. Perhaps that is another issue. So, and then just a question here before we close, also by Maxwell. Now, Maxwell Perikisi, you can see on the chat line, is actually the president of the South Africa Nigeria Business Chamber. So thanks, Maxwell, for your participation and your interventions. But a question that I think I raised with Nazima, looking at East Africa really, is continental tax harmonization ever going to be a possibility at all on the back of the African free trade area, especially in cases of intra-African trade, to avoid double taxation? Kunle, Nazima, I was just thinking of East Africa because it's much further ahead in terms of regional integration than other regions. Or Kunle, I don't know if one of you wants to answer. Have we lost Nazima?
No, I'm right here.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, so very good question, Diana. And I think we are perceived to be further ahead, but in reality, we're not quite there yet. We have a common agreement in terms of customs issues. So we have the East African Community Customs Management Act, and that's all your customs covered there. What we still don't have, and sadly so, in the region, is double tax agreements between ourselves and all our neighboring countries. So unfortunately, Tanzania and Burundi still have not assented to the DTAs that would then harmonize, tax within tax treatment within the region. So the only harmonized tax treatment is for customs, really. Okay. What we're really hoping that those double tax agreements can be finalized sometime soon, so that we have clear regional integration on that basis. So we're really not quite there yet. At least I don't think so.
Dev, I see your hand up, and Kunle, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, after that.
Oh, thank you, Kunle. Thank you, there. Well, if I may add on that issue, is in our last, or the one before the last webinar organized by LEX Africa, I made mention of what is required to harmonize tax and have a very good tax system for the benefit of the whole of Africa, namely African Union. We said, in double tax treaty, which is based either on the OECD model, on the UN model, drafted since a very long time, we don't have a modern model of double taxation. I said it is time for us to get a model double tax agreement for the African Union, which will actually cater for all African countries and have a tax system which accommodates all African countries, so that there's not that issue of unbalanced tax system or tax evasion or other concepts like tax dodging. That is very important. When I was doing my international tax law lecture in 1998, I made a recommendation for that. But then we have not seen anything, and we have not seen the African Union coming with a proposal for having a model tax treaty agreement for Africa. Discussed, developed by the African based on the African needs to encourage trade and international business into Africa. If we had that model of double taxation agreement between ourselves in a harmonized way, whereby the recipient country will not lose on the income, and the other jurisdiction will also not lose on the route or companies which is being used in that jurisdiction. There'll be a win-win situation, and if at all one country is losing on its tax base, this could have been compensated under a model mean to Africa, like the OECD has recently done. They have introduced a multilateral agreement to correct any imbalance. I think this is possible, but then politician has to go to the union and make a request. Then we tax lawyers or tax official will develop a system which will be a win-win situation for all African countries, because otherwise all income will leave Africa, will go either to Europe or to Asia, China, and nothing will be left in the African tax base.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that intervention. Now, I think that there's a bit of a zero-sum game thinking along a lot of the African Union policy. But Kunle, you would like to chip in there?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. And for me, my view on the question is, it's certainly a possibility that we'll get tax harmonization, but how soon? I think that's the challenge. To Nazima's point earlier, what we have is sort of trade harmonization, and we've got this in little blocks: the East Africa Community, the SADC, ECOWAS, OHADA for Francophone, and we've got little pockets like that. But what I believe is the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is accelerating that process. So once we have trade harmonization, then it's easier to have conversations around tax harmonization, because it's certainly impossible for every single country in Africa to conclude a tax treaty with themselves. 54 times 54 in multiple places. That's permutation is just incredible. So I think I share Dev's comment around an Africa model tax treaty, which everybody subscribes to, that defines the basis for how we engage on tax. So it's certainly possible, but it's just maybe still far. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kunle. I'm just the last question I'm going to ask myself and to Ivy. And just, Nigeria's tax to GDP ratio, we've heard about the government being actively pursuing low-hanging fruit and so on and so forth. Do Nigerians, I mean, given the infrastructure deficits and the power problems and all sorts of issues in the Nigerian economy, is one of the reasons that Nigeria battles to get people to pay tax is because taxpayers don't feel the value. They can't see that their tax money is being used for their own good. I mean, I think we're feeling a bit of that in South Africa, but not nearly to the same extent, possibly in Nigeria. So I'm going to give the last word to you.
Yes, there's this perverse social contract in Nigeria, whereby we have taxpayers. We are looking at we don't need to pay tax. We're not getting anything from the government. We don't have the infrastructures and all of that. And government is looking at, okay, if we don't take tax from them, we don't need to be held so much to account for what we do with the resources that we have. So that's perverse social contract is there. And I think the Nigerian economy is beginning to see that it cannot work that way, and they're taking steps to change that.
So it's a sort of a broken social contract at this stage, but in a way, I think tax is a social contract, and I think that's what we're lacking in a lot of Africa. So I just want to round off there, and thank everybody. Thank you to LEX Africa for co-hosting this and co-arranging it with us, with the South African Nigeria Business Chamber. Thank you to our great speakers. I think it's been incredibly interesting. I'm not a tax expert in any way or form, but I found that incredibly interesting. And thank you also to the audience, those of you still with us, for joining us here today. I think we will be sharing the presentations if anyone would like. We'll check with the speakers to make sure, but also the recording of the session for anyone who had to leave early. So that's all, folks. That's all from us today, and I hope you enjoyed it and you learned as much as I did. And if you'd like to contact everyone and everyone in the LEX Africa network, you know who you are and who to contact. And also, if anyone would like to be engaged with the chamber, you can find me very easily. So thanks very much, everybody. I'm going to close the session now.
Thank you.